The massive doors of the council chamber opened with a sound that echoed through the halls. Commander Jake Morrison walked through them, his boots clicking against the polished floor. Behind him came 12 other humans, all dressed in their formal diplomatic uniforms. The chamber was huge, big enough to hold representatives from over 1,000 different alien species. Lights from different worlds created a rainbow of colors across the curved walls. Jake had been to this chamber many times before. Each time he had hoped things would be different. Each time he left disappointed. Today would be different, though, just not in the way the council expected. The Velkari ambassador was speaking. His voice came through the translator as cold and precise. He was explaining why humanity's request had been denied again. It was the same speech Jake had heard 5 times now. Humans were too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable. The words stung because they were unfair and everyone in the room knew it. Jake thought about the last 70 years. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council with such hope. They had believed in cooperation and peace. They had given everything they could. Human soldiers had fought in 3 major wars to protect alien worlds. Millions of them had died. Human scientists had shared their medical discoveries freely. They had cured diseases on 12 different planets. Human engineers had helped build stations and ships and systems across the galaxy. What had humanity received in return? Nothing but contempt. The council treated humans like children who needed to be managed. They took human help but never gave respect. They used human blood and human knowledge, but never offered true partnership. High Chancellor Zephyros spoke next. His body was made of living crystal that caught the light and threw it in all directions. His voice was final and absolute. The human delegation would remain as provisional members. The matter was closed. No discussion, no debate. Just a simple dismissal of 70 years of sacrifice. Jake looked down at the papers in his hands. Secretary Lisa Bennett had helped him write this speech. They had spent weeks on it. Every word was carefully chosen. Every fact was documented. The speech outlined everything humanity had done for the council. It asked for fairness and equality. It was perfect. Jake folded the papers and put them in his pocket. He stepped up to the speaking platform. The chamber grew quiet. Everyone expected him to read his prepared statement and then leave quietly the way humans always did. They expected him to accept another rejection with dignity. Jake took a breath and spoke clearly. His voice was not loud, but the chamber's design carried it to every corner. He talked about 70 years of service. He talked about human soldiers who died protecting alien worlds. He talked about human scientists who shared knowledge freely. He talked about how the council had taken everything and given nothing back. Ambassador Krell of the Thaxian Concordat stood up. His 3 arms waved in a gesture of dismissal. He started to say that this outburst proved humans were not mature enough for a council seat. He never finished the sentence. Jake interrupted him. 2 simple words that changed everything. We're done. Chamber went completely silent. Jake continued speaking. Humanity was withdrawing from the Galactic Council. Effective immediately. They were going home. All of them. Jake turned and walked toward the exit. He did not look back. Behind him, the other humans followed. Claire Hudson, his diplomatic aide, was shaking as she walked. Her datapad trembled in her hands. Colonel Pete Brennan, the military observer, kept his face blank. Dr. Sophie Grant bit her lip, but said nothing. They all followed Jake out of the chamber. Behind them, chaos erupted. Aliens were shouting. Some were angry. Some were shocked. Some were confused. The council had never seen anything like this before. No species had ever just walked away. Jake kept walking. His heart was pounding, but his steps were steady. He had just done something that would change history. He was not sure if it was the right choice, but he knew it was the only choice left. Humanity had tried patience. They had tried diplomacy. They had tried sacrifice. Nothing had worked. As they reached the transport bay, Lisa Bennett caught up to Jake. Her face was pale, but determined. She asked him if he knew what he had just done. Jake nodded. He had just ended 70 years of human participation in galactic politics. He had potentially isolated humanity from every other civilization in the galaxy. But he had also done something else. He had shown the Council that humans would not be pushed around forever. He had shown them that respect had to be earned both ways. He had shown them that humanity had limits. The transport ship lifted off from Council Station Prime, through the windows. Jake could see the massive station growing smaller. It was the center of galactic government, the place where 1,000 species came together. For 70 years, humanity had been part of that. Now they were leaving it behind. The flight back to Earth was quiet. Nobody spoke much. They were all thinking about what had just happened. Some of them looked worried. Some looked relieved. Jake just looked tired. When they arrived on Earth, they found that news of the withdrawal had already spread. The media was everywhere. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Everyone wanted to know why humanity had left the Council. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. President Hammond met them at the landing pad. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been president for 8 years and had dealt with the Council many times. He looked at Jake and asked him one question. "Are you sure about this?" Jake answered honestly. He was not sure about anything. But he was certain that staying in the Council under the current conditions would have been worse. He was certain that humanity deserved better than to be treated as second class. Citizens forever. President Hammond nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He shook Jake's hand and thanked him. He said that someone needed to have the courage to walk away. He said that sometimes you had to lose everything to find out what really mattered. That night, Jake sat in his apartment and watched the news. Every channel was talking about the withdrawal. Some people were angry. They said humanity was making a mistake. Some people were supportive. They said it was about time humanity stood up for itself. Everyone had an opinion. Jake turned off the news and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council was dealing with the consequences of his decision. Somewhere out there, 1,000 alien species were realizing that humanity was no longer available to solve their problems. He wondered what would happen next. He wondered if the Council would collapse without human support. He wondered if humanity had just made the biggest mistake in its history. But mostly, he wondered if the galaxy would finally learn to respect humanity. Not because they needed humans, but because humans had shown they were willing to walk away. Only time would tell. 6 weeks passed after humanity left the Council. At first, nothing seemed to change. The galaxy continued spinning. Ships moved between stars. Trade continued. Life went on. But then the cracks started to show. Small problems at first, then bigger ones. Things that humanity had quietly been fixing for 70 years started to break down. The Toral Mining Consortium noticed it first. Their neutronium production dropped by almost half in just 1 month. Neutronium was essential for building faster-than-light engines. Without it, the entire galactic economy would slow down. The Toral had been mining neutronium for centuries, but human engineers had made their operations much more efficient. They had introduced safety systems and better extraction methods. Station Chief Valkara stood in what was left of Processing Hub 7. The explosion had killed 43 workers and injured hundreds more. Rescue teams were still pulling bodies from the wreckage. The coolant system had failed, just like the human engineer had warned it would. His name was Henry Clark, and he had left 4 weeks ago with all the other humans. Valkara remembered laughing when Henry expressed concern. She had told him that the Toral had operated these facilities long before humans arrived. What she did not mention was that those early centuries had been filled with disasters just like this one. The humans had not invented neutronium mining. They had just made it safe. Now, the safety was gone. People were dying again. In the Outer Rim, the Klaxon defense fleet was having different problems. The Ravagers had launched another raid, and the fleet was struggling to respond. Admiral Threxus watched his formations fall apart on the display screens. Ships were moving too slowly. Communications were confused. 3 cruisers were already burning in space. Commander Greg Palmer had changed everything when he arrived 5 years ago. He was a human tactical coordinator who understood patterns and predictions. He had created algorithms that anticipated Ravager attacks with incredible accuracy. The fleet had not lost a major battle in 3 years. Threxus had called those algorithms unnecessary complications. He had dismissed Greg's concerns about maintaining the system. He had been happy when Greg left with the other humans. Now he watched his ships die and understood the difference between complicated and sophisticated. The medical crisis hit. Everyone, Dr. Sophie Grant and her team, had been working on a cure for the Cascade Plague. This disease affected 17 different species across the galaxy. It was deadly and spreading fast. The humans were close to finishing a universal treatment. Then they left and took all their research with them. The Valkyrie Science Institute tried to continue the work. They quickly discovered a problem. The humans had been much further ahead than they had reported. There were 3 major breakthroughs in the human research that the Valkyrie did not understand. Without those breakthroughs, the cure was impossible. The plague continued to spread. People continued to die. On Earth, Fleet Admiral Nathan Cross sat in a bunker deep under the Rocky Mountains. His second-in-command, Vice Admiral Karen Wu, brought him daily reports. The news from the galaxy was getting worse. The Galactic Stock Exchange had lost 30% of its value. Supply chains were breaking down. 2 council-member governments had been overthrown in coups. Karen asked Nathan if he felt any regret. He answered immediately, "No regret at all." The council needed to learn what humanity had actually been doing for them. For 70 years, humans had been holding their civilization together. The aliens had taken it for granted. They had treated humans like servants. Karen showed him the latest diplomatic messages. The council was sending hundreds of requests for emergency assistance. They wanted food shipments. They wanted medical supplies. They wanted technical support. They wanted humans to come back and fix everything. Nathan denied every single request. All of them. Humanity was not the council's solution anymore. The aliens had wanted humans gone, so humans were gone. Now they could deal with the consequences. Karen mentioned that some Earth governments were getting nervous. The crisis in the galaxy was worse than anyone expected. Some officials thought humanity should help. Nathan dismissed the concern. The whole point of leaving was to show the council that humanity would not be taken for granted anymore. If they rushed back to help at the first sign of trouble, nothing would change. Back at Council Station Prime, Chancellor Zephyros called an emergency meeting. The Grand Assembly Hall looked empty. Only 600 delegates showed up instead of the usual 1,000. Several species had withdrawn from the council completely. Some had collapsed into civil war. Others had isolated themselves to deal with internal problems. Zephyros stood at the center of the chamber. His crystal body was pulsing with colors that showed stress and worry. He told the assembled delegates that they needed to address the human question. The crisis was getting worse every day. Their civilization was falling apart. Ambassador Krell spoke next. The proud Thaxian looked much less arrogant than before. He admitted that humanity had been more important than anyone realized. Human workers and engineers and soldiers had touched every part of council operations. Infrastructure, defense, trade, medicine, everything. Removing them all at once had been like removing the foundation from a building. Senator Morvan of the Axion hegemony disagreed. He insisted they could rebuild without humanity. Their species had existed for thousands of years before humans reached space. They would adapt. They would find new solutions. They did not need humanity. Councillor Petra of the Lorian Assembly asked the obvious question. At what cost? The Cascade Plague had reached her homeworld. Hospitals were overwhelmed. People were dying in huge numbers. The human medical teams had offered treatment protocols, but the council had rejected them as too experimental. Now, there was no treatment at all, and the death toll was climbing. The debate went on for hours. Different delegates offered different solutions. Some wanted to apologize and ask humanity to return. Some wanted to prove they could manage without human help. Some just wanted someone to blame for the crisis. Eventually, they all reached the same conclusion. They needed humanity back. The problem was simple. Humanity was not answering their calls. Every diplomatic message went ignored. Every request for negotiation was rejected. The humans had closed their borders and withdrawn completely. They were not interested in talking. On Mars, Secretary Lisa Bennett met with President Hammond. They sat in a secure room looking at holographic displays of Council communications. The messages were getting more desperate every day. The Council was offering everything humanity had asked for. A security directorate seat with full voting rights. Veto power. Complete equality with all other members. Lisa pointed out that the Council was offering everything humans had wanted for 70 years. President Hammond's response was bitter. After 70 years of begging and being rejected, now the Council suddenly thought humanity was qualified. Now that their civilization was burning, humans were good enough. Lisa argued that people were dying. The Cascade Plague, the mining disasters, the Ravager raids, humanity had the ability to help. They had the medicine and the technology and the knowledge. Should they really stand by and watch people suffer? Hammond's answer was harsh but honest. They also had the ability to let the Council face consequences for their choices. For once in human history, they were not rushing to save people who had spent decades treating them with contempt. Lisa asked the important question: what was the endgame? Humanity could not stay isolated forever. Eventually, they would need to engage with the galaxy again. What were they trying to accomplish? Hammond was not sure humanity needed to engage at all. In the 3 months since leaving the Council, Earth's economy had grown 8%. Research was progressing faster without bureaucratic oversight. The military was not wasting resources protecting ungrateful allies. Maybe isolation was not a punishment. Maybe it was freedom, Lisa said quietly, that humanity was better than this. Better than standing by while others suffered. Better than letting anger drive their choices. Hammond asked a simple question in return. Were they? For centuries, humanity had defined itself by helping others, even when it cost them everything. Even when they got nothing in return. Maybe it was time to ask what humanity gained from all that sacrifice. The conversation ended without resolution. President Hammond returned to his office. Lisa stayed behind, looking at the desperate messages from the Council. She knew the president was right about the injustice. But she also knew that watching civilizations collapse while having the power to help felt wrong. Somewhere between justice and mercy, humanity had to find its answer. The question was whether they would find it before the galaxy burned down completely. Month 6 arrived with more bad news. The Galactic Council was not just struggling anymore. It was actively falling apart. What started as supply chain problems and economic difficulties had turned into something much worse. War had come to the galaxy. The Velkarathixian War began over mining rights in the Kepler sector. Both species claimed the same asteroid field. Both had legitimate historical claims. For decades, human mediators had managed this dispute carefully. They had created agreements and compromise solutions. They had kept the peace. Now the mediators were gone. The Valkyri and Thaxian diplomats tried to negotiate directly. Within a week, negotiations became accusations. Accusations became threats. Threats became blockades. Then someone fired the first shot, and the war began. The conflict spread quickly. The Valkyri had allies who joined the fight. The Thaxians called on old friends for support. Soon, 12 different species were involved in active combat. Old grudges that human diplomats had carefully contained for decades came flooding back. Everyone had a reason to fight. Nobody had a reason to stop. Captain Troy Sanders commanded the Earth Defense Force patrol ship Valiant. His job was to monitor the border between human space and Council territory. From there, he could watch the war spread across the galaxy. It was like watching a forest fire from a safe distance. His communications officer was Lieutenant Amy Chen. She was young and idealistic, fresh from the academy. She had joined the military because she believed in protecting people. Now she sat at her console reading distress calls that they were not allowed to answer. Amy looked up from her screen with troubled eyes. She told Captain Sanders that they were receiving distress calls from civilian vessels caught in the war zone. Refugee transports full of families. Medical ships carrying injured. They were all requesting safe passage through human space. Troy's orders were clear. Deny all requests. Humanity was not intervening in council affairs. He told Amy to send the standard rejection message. Amy pointed out that there were children on those ships, families, innocent people, who had nothing to do with the war or the politics. They were just trying to survive. Troy closed his eyes for a moment. He had 2 daughters at home on Europa. They were safe and happy. The children on those refugee ships were not safe. They were running from war and death. All they needed was permission to cross through human space. Such a simple thing. But the orders were clear. If they broke protocol now, it would undermine everything. It would show that humanity's resolve was weak. It would invite the council to keep taking advantage of human kindness. Troy told Amy to maintain the denial. They could not help Amy turn back to her console without another word. Troy could see her shoulders shaking slightly. He felt the same tension in his own chest. Standing by while others suffered went against everything they had learned at the academy. It violated every value they supposedly held as humans. But orders were orders. And maybe, Troy thought, sometimes doing the right thing in the big picture meant doing something that felt wrong in the moment. Back on Earth, the political situation was changing. Public opinion was shifting. When humanity first left the council, Most people supported the decision. They were angry about 70 years of disrespect. They wanted the council to face consequences. But 6 months of watching the galaxy burn was changing minds. News correspondent Julia Martinez stood outside the Federal Assembly building. Behind her, protesters filled the streets. Some held signs saying, "We're better than this," and "Help them before it's too late." Other protesters shouted back about council betrayal and human sovereignty. The debate had moved from government halls to the streets. Julia reported that demonstrations had been growing for 3 weeks. Citizens across Earth and every colony were questioning the isolation policy. Many still supported the withdrawal, but they were troubled by the cost. Was proving a point worth watching civilizations collapse? Inside the Federal Assembly, Senator Frank Caldwell was making the same argument to his colleagues. He spoke with barely controlled fury. The galaxy was burning. Civilizations were falling apart. The Cascade Plague had killed millions. The Valkyrie-Thaxian War had displaced billions. And humanity was sitting safely behind closed borders, calling this justice. Senator Margaret Owens responded coldly. "This was not justice," she said. "It was consequences." For 70 years, humanity had enabled council dysfunction. Humans had solved alien problems so the aliens never had to learn. They had protected alien species so the aliens never had to protect themselves. They had provided medicine so the aliens never had to develop their own. Now the aliens were learning. They were learning what happened when you took your helpers for granted. They were learning that actions have consequences. Frank shot back with anger. They were learning by dying? By descending into chaos and war? Was that really the lesson humanity wanted to teach? The assembly erupted into argument. Half the senators agreed with Frank, the other half agreed with Margaret. The unity that existed in the first months after withdrawal was gone. Now human society itself was dividing over the question of what to do in the Rocky Mountain bunker. Admiral Nathan Cross received an unexpected visitor. Commander Jake Morrison, the man who started everything by walking out of the council chamber 6 months ago, requested a meeting. Jake entered the office and got straight to the point. He needed to know something. When they planned the withdrawal, did Nathan anticipate things would get this bad? Nathan studied Jake carefully. The younger officer looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes. He had clearly not been sleeping well. Nathan told him the truth. Yes, they knew it would be difficult for the council. That was the entire point, Jake said. The point was to prove human value, not to watch civilizations collapse. There had to be a difference. Nathan asked a simple question. Was there a difference? The council would never learn the first lesson without experiencing the second. They had to feel real pain before they would understand what they had lost. Jake walked to the strategic display on the wall. The map showed the galaxy in real time. Red zones indicating active combat covered huge sections of space. The red was spreading like a disease. He asked Nathan how many people had to die before the point was made. Nathan's response was harsh. How many humans died making the Council's point? How many millions did humanity lose fighting alien wars? How many human lives were spent protecting species that could not be bothered to show respect? Where was the Council's conscience when humans were dying? Jake said quietly that humanity was supposed to be better than the Council. Better than revenge. Better than standing by while others suffered? Nathan agreed that humanity was better. That was exactly why they left. They were no longer enabling failure. The Council needed to grow up, and sometimes growing up was painful. Jake made his decision in that moment. He told Nathan that he was requesting immediate retirement from military service. Effective immediately. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Jake was throwing away a promising career. Everything he had worked for. Why? Jake said he was not throwing anything away. He was choosing what kind of person he wanted to be. And that person did not stand by while others suffered, regardless of whether they deserved help. Nathan let him go without argument. He understood that some people could not handle hard choices. Some people needed to feel like heroes all the time. Jake Morrison was one of those people. Nathan was not. After Jake left, Nathan returned to the strategic display. The red zones were still spreading. The war was getting worse. The plague was killing more people every day. The economic collapse was accelerating, all according to plan. The Council needed to hit bottom before they could rebuild. They needed to exhaust every other option before they would truly change. Nathan was willing to let that happen, no matter how long it took. He believed in the long game. Short-term suffering for long-term progress? It was cold calculation, but someone had to make the hard choices. Jake Morrison walked out of the bunker into bright sunlight. He was no longer a military officer. He was just a man who had made a decision. He was not sure what he would do next, but he knew one thing clearly. He would not let politics stop him from helping people. If that meant breaking rules, so be it. If that meant going against orders, fine. Some things were more important than discipline. He looked up at the sky and thought about all the ships out there. It's full of refugees and injured and desperate people. Ships that were being turned away from human space because of policy. Policies could be changed. Rules could be broken. Jake had proven that 6 months ago when he walked out of the council chamber. Maybe it was time to prove it again. The turning point came from an unexpected place, not from governments or military leaders or diplomatic negotiations. It came from ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Dr. Sophie Grant sat in her laboratory on Earth, looking at the research files on her computer. For 6 months, she had watched the Cascade Plague spread through the galaxy. The death toll was now in the millions and climbing every day. She had the cure. It was right there in her files. Complete treatment protocols that her team had developed before the withdrawal. The protocols were classified. Sharing them with the Council would violate the embargo. The penalty for breaking the embargo was severe. Prison time. Loss of her medical license. The end of her career. Sophie looked at the numbers again. 3 million dead from the plague. Another 5 million infected and dying. The treatment she had developed could save almost all of them. It was a simple matter of sharing the information. She made her decision quickly, before she could change her mind. Sophie encrypted a message and sent it to her former research partner, a Valkyrie scientist named Trexa. The message contained everything. Complete treatment protocols, dosage information, manufacturing specifications, everything needed to produce and distribute the cure. She included a short note with the data. People should not die for politics. Sophie was arrested 3 hours later. Federal agents came to her lab with warrants. She was charged with violating the Council Embargo Act, an unauthorized transmission of classified information. The penalties could include 10 years in prison. She felt strangely peaceful as they led her away in handcuffs. She had broken the law, but she had saved millions of lives. That seemed like a fair trade. The arrest became public knowledge within hours. News of Sophie's actions spread across Earth and all human colonies. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People were angry, but not at Sophie. They were angry that she had been arrested for saving lives. Protests erupted everywhere. Millions of people took to the streets. They carried signs supporting Sophie. They chanted her name. They demanded her release. Within 48 hours? There were demonstrations in every major city on Earth, in every colony world. Other scientists followed Sophie's example, Dr. Ryan Foster, a human engineer who had worked on the Toral mining stations, sent safety protocols and system specifications to his former colleagues. He was arrested immediately. Protests doubled in size. Dr. Linda Hayes, human physician who specialized in emergency medicine, transmitted trauma care procedures to overwhelmed alien hospitals. She was arrested the same day. The protests grew larger. More and more people began breaking the embargo. Engineers shared technical specifications. Doctors shared medical knowledge. Teachers shared educational materials. Each person who broke the rules was arrested. Each arrest made the protests bigger. The dam had broken. Human compassion was flooding over the walls of government policy. President Hammond stood in the Situation Room, watching reports from across human space. His advisors were arguing about how to handle the crisis. Some wanted to crack down harder on embargo violations. Others wanted to pardon everyone and end the isolation policy completely. The president looked tired. He had aged visibly in the past 6 months. The weight of his decisions was showing on his face. He had believed that isolation was the right choice. He had believed that the council needed to learn a hard lesson. But he had not anticipated how hard it would be for humans to stand by and watch others suffer. His chief of staff, Secretary Lisa Bennett, brought him the latest numbers. 16,000 formal requests for clemency. 3 billion signatures on petitions demanding humanitarian operations be resumed. The pressure was enormous and growing every hour. Then something arrived that changed everything. A message from High Chancellor Zephyros. But he was not alone in the video message. Standing with him were representatives from almost every council species. Even species that had opposed humanity most strongly were there. President Hammond played the message for his senior staff. Zephyros began speaking, and his words carried a humility that had never been there before. He addressed the people of Earth directly. He admitted that the Council had made terrible mistakes for 70 years. Zephyros said, the Council had failed to recognize what humanity gave them. Not just technology or military power, but values. Humanity believed in helping others even at cost to themselves. They believed in lifting others up rather than tearing them down. They believed that civilizations should support each other. Ambassador Krell of the Thaxians spoke next. The proud alien who had dismissed humanity 6 months ago now looked humbled. He admitted that they had treated humans as servants when they were actually the foundation of galactic peace. They saw that now, though the lesson had been expensive. Counselor Petra continued. They were not asking humanity to return as provisional members. They were asking humans to return as they should have been from the beginning, as equals, as partners, and as teachers. The message ended with a formal invitation. Humanity was offered full Security Directorate membership, expanded voting rights, and permanent equal status. The apology would be inscribed in the Galactic Charter as permanent law. It would never be forgotten or erased. President Hammond played the message 3 times. He looked at his advisors. They all knew this was the moment of decision. The easy choice would be to reject the offer, to say it was too little, too late, to keep nursing their grievances, but humanity had never been good at taking. The easy choice. The president called for a special joint session of the Federal Assembly. Every senator and representative gathered to watch the council message and debate the response. The chamber was packed beyond capacity. People stood in the aisles and along the walls. Senator Frank Caldwell stood to speak first. He proposed that humanity accept the council offer, but with conditions. First, the apology must become permanent galactic law, not just empty words. Second, oversight protocols must be established to prevent any species from being marginalized as humans were. Third, Dr. Sophie Grant and all others who broke the embargo must be pardoned immediately and recognized for their courage. The proposal was seconded by an unexpected source. Senator Margaret Owens, who had been one of the strongest supporters of isolation, stood up. She admitted that she had been wrong. Justice and vengeance were not the same thing. Proving a point was not worth watching civilizations burn. Other senators spoke. Some agreed. Some disagreed. But the tone was different now. The anger that had driven the withdrawal 6 months ago had cooled. In its place was something more thoughtful. A recognition that humanity had proven its point, and now it was time to decide what to do with that victory. The vote was called. It was not close. The Assembly voted overwhelmingly to accept the Council offer with the stated conditions. Only 12 senators voted against it. President Hammond addressed the Assembly after the vote. He spoke about how they had left the Council to prove human worth. They had succeeded. The galaxy now understood what humanity contributed. The question was, what humans would do with that success. He said that humanity had always been defined by helping others, even when it was hard, even when it cost them everything. That was not a weakness to overcome. It was a strength to embrace. The isolation had taught the galaxy a lesson. But it had also taught humanity something. It had shown them that proving you are strong does not require staying angry. That having the power to hurt others does not mean you should use it. That true strength means helping people even when they do not deserve it. Hammond announced that he would accept the Council invitation. But he also announced something else. Dr. Sophie. Grant and all others arrested for breaking the embargo were immediately pardoned. Furthermore, they would be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for their courage and compassion. The Assembly erupted in applause. The decision was made. Humanity would return to the galaxy. That night, Sophie Grant was released from detention. She walked out of the facility to find thousands of people waiting for her. They cheered and clapped. Some were crying. She had expected to go to prison. Instead, she was a hero. A reporter asked her why she did it. Why she risked everything to help aliens who had spent decades treating humanity with contempt. Sophie's answer was simple. Because people were dying and she could help. It was not more complicated than that. Medicine was not about politics or pride or proving points. It was about saving lives. The reporter asked if she would do it again, knowing the consequences. Sophie smiled. She would do it 1,000 times. Some things were more important than rules. Across human space, the mood shifted. The anger and resentment that had driven the withdrawal was fading. In its place came something that felt more like humanity. Compassion, hope, the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. The galaxy was still broken. The war still raged. The plague still killed. But now there was a path forward. Now, there was hope that things could be fixed. Humanity was coming back. And this time, they would be coming back on their own terms. As equals. As partners. As the civilization they had always tried to be, 3 weeks after the vote. Commander Jake Morrison found himself standing at the podium in the Grand Assembly Hall once again. The last time he had been here, he had walked out in anger. This time, he was walking back in with hope. The chamber was packed. Nearly 1,500 species had sent representatives. Many of them were not even council members. They had come from across the galaxy just to witness this moment. The day humanity returned, Jake wore his formal uniform again. But this time, he felt different. 6 months ago, he had been angry and frustrated. Now he felt something like peace. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed. Everyone had learned hard lessons. He looked out at the assembled delegates and saw respect instead of contempt. He saw hope instead of dismissal. The chamber was completely silent, waiting for him to speak. Jake began with simple words. 70 years ago, humanity joined the Galactic Council seeking partnership. They believed that together, different species could build something greater than any of them could achieve alone. They had been right about the goal, even if the road was harder than anyone imagined. He talked about the past 6 months, the pain and the struggle, the deaths and the destruction. Nobody had wanted things to turn out this way, but sometimes you had to break something completely before you could rebuild it properly. Humanity was returning to the council, Jake said, but not as they left it. They were returning as full partners in a renewed vision. They were returning because they believed civilization meant helping each other, especially when it was difficult. High Chancellor Zephyros approached the podium. For the first time in Council history, he bowed to a representative from another species. It was a gesture of profound respect. He welcomed humanity home. He said there was much work to do, and the Council could not do it without human help. The chamber erupted in applause. Real applause this time, not just polite recognition. The sound filled the massive space and echoed off the walls. Species that had never agreed on anything were united in this moment. Jake looked back at the human delegation. Secretary Lisa Bennett smiled, her earlier doubts resolved. Admiral Nathan Cross, invited as an observer, gave a small nod of approval. Dr. Sophie Grant wiped tears from her eyes. Standing in the back was Captain Troy Sanders. He had requested transfer to the new Humanitarian Response Fleet, a joint operation between humans and Council species. The fleet's mission was emergency relief anywhere in the galaxy. Lieutenant Amy Chen had joined the same program. They both felt like they were finally doing what they had joined the military to do. The real work began immediately. The Velcrithaxian War needed to end. Human mediators returned to the negotiating table. This time, both sides were actually willing to listen. Within 2 weeks, a ceasefire was established. Within a month, peace terms were agreed upon. The human mediators had not forgotten. It's the skills that kept the peace for 70 years. The Cascade Plague was finally contained. With Dr. Sophie Grant's treatment protocols now widely distributed, the death rate dropped dramatically. Human medical teams worked alongside alien doctors to treat the infected. Millions of lives were saved. The cooperation between human and alien medical workers became a model for future partnerships. The Toro Mining Consortium rebuilt their facilities with human engineering support. This time, they actually listened to safety recommendations. Henry Clark, the engineer who had warned about the coolant system, returned to help redesign the entire network. The new systems were safer and more efficient than ever before, but the biggest changes were not technical. They were social and political. The entire structure of the Galactic Council was reformed. The old hierarchies that elevated some species above others were dismantled. New protocols ensured that every member species had genuine representation. Regardless of size or age, the Security Directorate expanded to include rotating seats. No single group could monopolize power anymore. Decisions required real consensus, not just the approval of a few dominant species. It was slower and more complicated, but it was also more fair. None of it was perfect. There were still arguments and disagreements. Old prejudices did not disappear overnight. Some species struggled to adapt to the new equality. But there was genuine effort to build something better. Commander Jake Morrison, promoted to ambassador after the successful reintegration, spent most of his time on Council Station Prime now. He had an office with a window overlooking the docking bays. He often stood there watching ships from hundreds of worlds coming and going in peaceful cooperation. Secretary Lisa Bennett visited him one afternoon. She brought 2 cups of coffee and joined him at the window. She asked if he ever wondered what would have happened if he had not walked out 6 months ago. Jake thought about it. Maybe humanity would have just continued being taken for granted forever. Maybe the Council would have eventually learned to respect humans anyway. But he doubted it. Sometimes you had to be willing to walk away to prove you were not afraid to stay. Lisa laughed at the philosophical answer. She said it was very deep for someone who had threatened to start an intergalactic incident. Jake preferred to call it diplomatic improvisation. They grew serious. Lisa mentioned that a lot of people had died during the 7 months of isolation. People who might have lived if humans had been there to help. That weight would always be there. Jake nodded slowly. He carried those deaths with him every day. But he also knew something important. If humanity had stayed under the old conditions, humans would have slowly been ground down to nothing. Exploited and disrespected and used up. Sometimes the cost of change was high, but the cost of not changing was higher. Through the window, they watched a human medical ship depart for the Outer Rim. It carried supplies and personnel to help rebuild communities devastated by the recent wars. A Valkyrie science vessel and a Thaxian transport joined it. 3 species that had been enemies 6 months ago now working together toward a common goal. Lisa spoke quietly, echoing the words that had become famous across the galaxy. One day humanity exited the Galactic Council and everything fell apart. Jake finished the thought. Everything fell apart, but then they put it back together. Not the way it was, but the way it should have been from the beginning. That made all the difference. The stars shone beyond the viewport, cold and distant and beautiful. For the first time in 70 years, humanity looked at them not as supplicants or servants, but as equals among equals. Partners in building a civilization worthy of those infinite lights, Dr. Sophie Grant opened the new Cascade Research Institute on Earth. Scientists from 30 different species came to work there. They were developing treatments for diseases that affected multiple species. The cooperation between human and alien researchers was producing breakthroughs faster than anyone expected. Sophie often thought about her decision to break the embargo. She had risked everything to share knowledge that saved millions of lives. Looking back, it seemed like such an obvious choice. But she knew that obvious choices were only obvious in hindsight. Captain Troy Sanders commanded the humanitarian fleet ship Unity. His crew was mixed, humans and aliens working side by side. They responded to disasters and emergencies across the galaxy. No politics, no borders, just help for anyone who needed it. Amy Chen served as his communications officer. She had seen her idealism tested during the isolation months. She had been forced to turn away refugees and deny help to people in danger. It had nearly broken her. Now she was doing the work she had always dreamed of doing. Troy asked her once if she regretted staying in the military during the isolation. Amy thought carefully before answering. She regretted the people they could not help. But she understood why the hard choice had been necessary. Sometimes you had to establish boundaries before you could establish partnerships. Admiral Nathan Cross remained at his post in the Rocky Mountain bunker. He had been the architect of the isolation strategy. Some people called him a hero. Others called him a monster. He did not care much about either label. He believed he had done what was necessary. The council needed to hit bottom before they could change. It had worked. The reforms were real and substantial. The respect for humanity was genuine now, earned through absence rather than presence. Whether the cost had been worth it, history would judge. Nathan was content to let future generations make that decision. He had played the long game and achieved this strategic objective. That was enough. Jake Morrison stood at his window on Council Station Prime late one night. The station never truly slept. Ships came and went at all hours. People from 1,000 worlds moved through the corridors, working together, living together, building together. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the anger and the pain, the isolation and the consequences, the slow rebuilding of trust. It had been necessary, but it had been hard. A message came through on his personal communicator. It was from President Hammond on Earth. The message was short. Thank you for having the courage to walk away, and thank you for having the wisdom to come back. Jake smiled. Walking away had been the easy part. Anyone could leave in anger. Coming back required something harder. It required forgiveness and hope, and the belief that people could change. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed. Everyone had learned that cooperation was not weakness, and independence was not strength. Real power came from working together while maintaining dignity and respect. The story that began with an angry exit ended with a hopeful return. Not perfect, but possible. Not easy, but worthwhile. The kind of story that humans had always been good at telling. Stories about falling down and getting back up. Stories about making mistakes and learning from them. Stories about building something better from the ruins of something broken. One day humanity exited the Galactic Council, and everything fell apart. But from those ruins, something better emerged. A civilization built on genuine respect rather than convenient exploitation. A partnership of equals rather than masters and servants. The stars still shone cold and distant and beautiful. But now they shone on a galaxy that had learned an important lesson. That civilizations, like people, grow strongest not when they never fall, but when they learn to help each other stand back up, and humanity having spent 70 years helping others stand, had finally taught the galaxy to help them in return, not through force or demands, but through absence and presence. Through showing what was lost when they left and what was possible when they returned, the Grand Assembly Hall would meet again tomorrow. There would be debates and disagreements and difficult decisions, but they would face those challenges together as partners. With genuine respect flowing in all directions, Commander Jake Morrison would be there, representing humanity with dignity and pride. The journey had been long and painful, but they had arrived at a destination worth reaching, a galaxy where humanity was finally home.